I'm a recent arrival to this rural area in eastern nowhere, about 15 miles from the city, give or take. There's woods in all directions, neighbors about a quarter mile on either path, which spells beloved isolation to me. And hey, it suits me just fine. Plenty of space to work on my hobby. I'm a bit of a car guy, big on refurbishing and flipping junkers into semi-desirable products. And that said, I do run a Craigslist ad showcasing and selling the lesser models, whereas the better ones I work based on commission through an official website, and it's how I make a living. The town down the way earns me some decent sum, good spending and drinking money, but the real money is in the city. It's funny how the townies are more likely to use Craigslist ads than the city folk, who are more than likely to use my actual website. They're the ones that push the more expensive cars, the ones that pay the bills. Craigslist was more or less a side hustle. Still, maybe it was just a chance or whatever, but you'd be shocked how well Craigslist worked in my case. Still, you'd think a guy like me in this remote place would have been more careful. And the thing about being in a remote area, it kinda has a way of boomeranging you in the face. This guy had a way of making your skin want to fly off your bones. It didn't help that his junker was beyond redemption. I mean, how he got that thing here was beyond me, though he didn't come alone, and let's be clear, that van pretty much spoke for itself. I told him as clearly as I could that this car was no good. I'd take it off his hands for a generous $100 just for the parts and scrap. I figured if I lowballed the guy, he'd just shrug it off and leave. Yet his tune somehow changed entirely the second I told him that I'd scrap it down. He told me he'd pay me $50 to get rid of it. And he gave me the cash there and then and left. Kind of suspicious, really. Business was good, but occasionally I did hit dry spells here and there. This was the first job of the month and was the second week in. It was doubtful whether or not this piece of crap would yield any decent parts, but at least the steel would count for something or other. I had a decent stockpile of the crap out back under a tarp, almost near a ton. I could sell that when the price went back up, and hopefully it wouldn't rust to crap by then. I kept that place locked down nice and tight in the dead of night so there's nobody getting in. My very own fortress of solitude, not even the Night Stalker could break in there. That night, I was appraising prices when I heard the crash inside the garage. And then it just sort of hits me. Those rednecks, they're back. They must be. There are things in life a person doesn't want to see, of which I'm sure you can name off the top of your heads. But what I'm talking about are the things that you don't know what until it's right there in front of you, grinning like a personified shit show as its reality pours out right before you in stark, undesirable facts. And like I said earlier about isolation, boomeranging around and hitting you in the face, there's a lot to be said about an isolated home in the middle of nowhere that specializes in fixing cars. It's a lucrative business. The cash is bound to be buried under a floorboard or two. And kudos, I guess, for planning that dude in the trunk. How or why they came to the conclusion that I had a cache of treasure in the garage is beyond me. In the end, they stole a bunch of tools, my radio and a TV, and nothing of a lot of value. Those idiots are still on the loose, and me, well, I'm buying a gun. This happened to me about 5 years ago, and even now, I get chills just thinking about it. I was renting a small house in a quiet neighborhood at the time. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was cozy, affordable, and had a lot of character. The only thing I didn't love was the crawl space under the house. The access door to it was in the laundry room, a square wooden hatch flush with the door. It was locked from the outside, and I had never had any reason to open it, and I figured it was just pipes, cobwebs, and the usual creepy crawl space stuff. One evening, I came home late from work, and it had been a stressful day, and all I wanted was to shower and collapse into bed. As I stepped inside, I noticed something strange. My laundry room light was on. I was sure that I had turned it off that morning, but I chalked it up to being absent-minded in my rush to turn it off again. That night, I woke up at around 2 a.m. to a very faint noise, and at first I thought it was just the wind, but as I lay there, I realized that it was coming from the laundry room. A sort of soft, rhythmic thumping sound. My heart started to race, and I debated whether to get up and check it or just stay in bed and hope it stopped. Curiosity got the better of me, so I grabbed my phone for light and tiptoed to the laundry room. When I opened the door, everything was quiet. But then I saw it. The hatch to the crawl space was slightly ajar, and my stomach dropped. I distinctly remembered it being locked, and there was no way that I could have accidentally opened it. Trying to stay calm, I convinced myself that it might be an animal that had somehow gotten in. I shut the hatch tightly and placed a heavy box of detergent on top of it before going back to bed. The next day, I called the landlord to ask if there were any pest issues I should know about, and he seemed surprised and said no one had reported anything like that before. Still, he promised to send someone over to check it out. That night, I double-checked the hatch and even put a chair on top of it for good measure. I didn't hear any noises, and I started to feel a little chilly for being so freaked out. But around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door creaking open. I froze. My bedroom door doesn't creak unless you push it slowly, and I knew I had closed it before bed. I stayed as still as I could, barely breathing, as I heard soft footsteps shuffle into the room. My phone was on the nightstand just out of reach, and the footsteps stopped right next to my bed. I could feel someone's presence, their quiet breathing in the dark. Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and swung it toward the intruder. There was the man, crouched on the floor, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes wide and unblinking. He looked just as startled as I was. I screamed and bolted out of the room, running outside to the neighbor's house. I banged on their door until they let me in, and they called the police. When the officers arrived, they found the man still in my house, hiding in that crawl space. He had a small mattress, some food wrappers, and a collection of random items that he must have taken from my house. The lock on the hatch had been tampered with, and from the looks of it, he had been living under my house for at least a few days, maybe even longer. And the scariest part, the police said that they found a notebook with detailed notes about me. He had written down my daily routine, when I left for work, when I came home, even what I wore. And there were also a list of plans, though they wouldn't tell me what was on that. I moved out the next week and stayed with my friends until I found a new place. And to this day I have no idea how he got in or how long he had been watching me before I noticed that something was wrong. This started when I was at my childhood friend's apartment for what was supposed to be a fun little movie night. We hadn't hung out in a while and we were catching up. Her place was cozy, a little disorganized, and full of girly decor. We were in our comfiest sweatpants about to watch princess movies, and her apartment isn't the most tidy. Things are a bit scattered around, but it's clean and so authentic, which always made me feel at home, and we decided on ordering pizza for dinner. She mentioned that Sherwood, someone I hadn't met yet, would bring the pizza over, and at first I was not happy to hear that. I thought that meant that she had invited other friends, a boy, over to join us, which wasn't what I had in mind, but I was in for a surprise. Sherwood turned out to be just our delivery guy for the night. He wasn't joining us, and when he got to the apartment, there was this sort of awkward air about him. He was obviously nervous, fumbling a bit with the pizza boxes and not quite making eye contact. My friend introduced us quickly, and it was clear from her overly thankful demeanor that Sherwood did a lot more for her than just fetch dinner. After handing us the pizza, there was this brief moment of forced small talk. My friend was super nice to him despite his awkwardness, and he wasn't the best conversationalist and seemed really out of place. And then Sherwood asked for my number. I was in a tough spot because our mutual friend was sitting right there, so I just gave it to him. And yeah, we chatted for maybe 5 minutes before my friend gave him a cue to leave with something like, "Well, thanks so much for dropping this off." And he seemed to get the hint. We both gave him a hug before my friend said something like, "Well, drive safe," giving him another kind of cue to leave. When I asked my friend what that was all about, she basically explained that Sherwood was her unpaid personal assistant. He did her grocery shopping, he dropped off pizza, and he did all this other stuff. I think Sherwood was just a really lonely guy desperate for interaction, especially female interaction. My friend and I were both young and immature back then, and we were about 23, but I think we both knew something was seriously wrong with Sherwood. It was a little hard to articulate because we couldn't point out exactly what his problem was. Sherwood started a group chat with my friend and I, and he just sent a meme or two maybe every week, and it felt like he was trying to stay relevant without being intrusive. Maybe he was used to being sidelined or even blocked by every other girl in the past, and it felt like he was trying to make me remember him, but also carefully trying not to give me a reason to block him too. I can't speak on his behalf, and that's just what it felt like. Sherwood also offered help with errands. The first time I said, thanks for asking, but no, and he asked every weekend after that. One day I made the mistake of accepting his help, and I knew better. I had recently found a great deal for a new washing machine on Craigslist, but I had no idea how to pick it up and install it. And when I mentioned it in the chat, Sherwood excitedly volunteered to take care of the whole thing. He handled the whole pickup and installation like a total champ, which saved me so much hassle. I tried to pay him for his efforts because I wanted to show appreciation, but he wouldn't accept any money. I insisted, and eventually he suggested that I could repay him by joining him for a hike. What? Okay, well, I was uneasy about that, and it felt a bit too personal and almost like it could be mistaken for a date. But Sherwood framed it as nothing more than a friendly outing, like a transaction to balance out the favor, and I agreed to the hike. I rationalized it by telling myself it was a fair trade for installing the washing machine and that it was genuinely a form of payment, especially since I didn't think that he had too many friends. This hike felt like maybe a way for him to have some companionship, and I thought that it might be a nice way of helping him, and part of me was still uneasy about spending time with him in such an isolated setting. The day of the hike, Sherwood picked this trail that was nearby, and I had been there before, and it's gorgeous. As we walked along together, he chatted about ordinary things like work, the weather, and his hobbies. Everything seemed normal until he suggested we go off the main path to see something special he wanted to share. Like, what could that even mean? We reached this secluded spot, and there, my God, was a dead body. My heart pounded so violently as Sherwood stood there, so eerily calm and nonchalant. The casualness in his demeanor made me feel even more uneasy. It felt like he wasn't just showing me a dead body, but also revealing this darker side of himself. It smelled bad, but not like in the movies. I didn't know how long it had been there. I'm not a biologist, but my guess is that it smelled a lot worse before, but now it had gone down, I guess. And at that moment, I mumbled some excuse about needing to get back quickly and started walking briskly towards the main path. I was urging Sherwood to follow me, and I thought maybe this was some twisted mind game, like a way to intimidate me or show that he wasn't just some harmless little boy. Maybe he was trying to send a message that said, "You should know that I'm familiar with things like this." Oh, there's another possibility. Maybe he just wanted me to think about him more. And sometimes when I talk to people, I feel like they only notice me for the time that we're together, and then they won't think of me again until the next time we meet. It's possible Sherwood felt that way with me, and maybe he thought showing me a dead body would make him feel less forgettable. I have no idea. I had a million thoughts going through my head. But on the surface, he seemed oblivious to how insane this was. And as we walked back together, I was in full fight-or-flight mode, instinctively looking around to see if there was some other hikers or rangers, anyone who would make me feel like I wasn't alone in this. The moment I spotted someone else on the trail, I called out. Not to expose Sherwood, but just asking for directions back to the parking area. I wanted to make sure Sherwood and I wouldn't be left alone together, and I asked this gentleman to walk us back to the parking lot. I wasn't going to take no for an answer, and I kept pretending like I was confused about his directions, and eventually he just agreed to walk us out there. Getting help from that guy was my way of re-anchoring myself to safety and reality while I was still under the shock of this nightmare of what Sherwood had shown me. We got to the parking area, and there I called my friends and told her that I was with Sherwood, and I suggested that he could drop me off with her and that we'd be there in 20 minutes. And Sherwood seemed to agree. That was my way of making sure that if anything happened, it was on the record that Sherwood was the last person to have been with me. Also, I immediately texted my friend what had happened to get that on record too. When I got to her apartment, we said thanks to Sherwood and kindly told him to go away. I had already told her through text, but then I started going into all the detail. The fact that the body had insects, the fact that the face was decomposing but still recognizable, and her reaction was obviously pure horror. Not just about the dead body, but also how nonchalantly Sherwood had treated this whole situation. She confessed that she always sensed something was off about him, even though she never imagined anything this disturbing. We both agreed that we needed to remove Sherwood from our lives, and she admitted that she felt stuck and that she became too reliant on Sherwood to just fire him cold turkey. We planned out how we would do it. It was this gradual phasing out plan. We would limit our interactions to times when others were present, and we would slowly reduce our responses to his texts. I would never ask for his help again, and my friend would ask for less and less help. Sherwood kept texting during weekends offering to run errands or asking if we needed anything, to which my friend would reply, "I'm trying to work on being more independent, but you've really been such a help." And eventually, as my friend started dating someone new, she introduced Sherwood to her boyfriend, and Sherwood never contacted her after that. Internally freaking out, I called the cops that same night and reported the incident, but it was a while before we heard any news about it. At least a full month later, a news report confirmed discovering a dead body in that area of the woods where Sherwood had taken me hiking. They made an arrest, but not of Sherwood, but of this other guy that Sherwood followed on Instagram. I have no idea if Sherwood was connected to this murder. But now, reflecting on everything about that nightmare a while later, I think there's one clear moral of this story. Trust your instincts. I was 16 and I had met this kid down the street from my house. He said that he saw me around and that we should hang out, and I figured why not. So I gave him my number and told him to hit me up. The next week comes around and I get a text from him asking if I wanted to play basketball, and of course I did. He asked if I smoked weed, and I did, and asked me to bring some, which isn't out of the ordinary for teenagers. I brought a couple of friends since we were going to play sports, and to be honest, I was really stoned by the time I got there. It was a little out of our neighborhood, but it wasn't a bad hood, so I wasn't bothered, and I was an idiot for that. It was a gang who ambushed us as soon as we got out of the car. They violently beat me and my two friends, and I got it the worst. There were 3 of them on each of us. They stabbed my best friend, not very badly though, and they choked me unconscious, held a gun to my head, and pistol whipped me. They ran my pockets and got my cell phone and wallet, and I swear at one point I actually did die because I literally soiled myself when I went unconscious, and I was drenched in my own blood. My nose was broken, both eyes swelled shut later, and they had to wake me up because I drove a stick shift and nobody could drive my car. My attacker literally had to resuscitate me in order for me to leave, and I stopped at a gas station because I had soiled my pants and I couldn't see with blood in my eyes, and as soon as I got in, the clerk's jaw dropped. "Where's the bathroom?" I remember saying, and he pointed the direction. I cleaned up the best I could and then drove home. I got home, called the cops, and showered, and the cops obviously thought it was my fault for being an idiot. Nonetheless, an undercover showed up and knew exactly who robbed me because we lived on the same street 2 blocks apart. It turns out they had turned him informant and had reneged on the deal and robbed the buyers in the controlled buy. I told them how violent they were and swore that they would kill someone. I did a photo lineup, but they all looked the same to me, so there was really no case. And 2 months later, the cops knocked on the door. My mom was super pro-cop and told me that I was asleep in my room and turned them loose on me. And they woke me up and held up a photo and said, "Who's this?" How would I know? I've never seen this person before. You called this person from your cell phone. The cell phone I reported stolen in a violent robbery to the police? And they looked stunned and stupid. They beat me almost to death. You should probably go read the police report. And they apologized and explained that my cell phone had been used to set up a robbery and the person in the photo had been shot to death. I told you guys they'd kill the next guy. And they came in blazing glory and left in shame. I have PTSD from all of this now and have kept tabs on my assailant for 17 years. I have no ability to really trust anybody, and not even those closest to me. My boyfriend and I live in a big party city, so we're pretty used to strange neighbors and odd people. But 1 month ago, we had a really unsettling encounter. We just got the full context today. We live in a subunit of a larger house, and our landlord and one other person live in the other units of the house, and we noticed that our landlord had brought a few different dates over to the house. We didn't mind, and we weren't surprised when a girl was walking around the property. Last month, we went to sleep at about midnight and woke up 30 minutes later to knocks at the door. I told my boyfriend not to open it, but he said it was the girl that we saw earlier. I still felt very uneasy about the situation, so I put my clothes on and grabbed my keys and picked up our dog in case I had to run out the back door. I then go stand in the hallway next to the front door so I can hear the conversation, but she can't see me. She sounds very drunk and she tells my boyfriend that she's my landlord's fiancée. I am somewhat confused by this because of our landlord's other dates. However, she starts talking about how we're good tenants and mentions personal details about us, so we assume that she actually is his fiancée. She asked my boyfriend for a lighter for a cigarette, and we expect this to be the end of the interaction, but she then tells my boyfriend that our landlord is at a hotel cheating on her right now. My boyfriend responds with, "Oh, wow." And then she started flirting with my boyfriend. She invited him to come swim in our landlord's pool with her, and he declined. Now I'm starting to get less scared and more annoyed with this chick. She's rambling about a bunch of different topics and basically holding my boyfriend hostage. And finally, she gets to our neighbors. She starts going on some racist rant about them, using slurs that I have literally never heard in real life because they're that bad. And at this point, I'm pretty sick of this woman, so I step into the door frame and tell her that we have to wake up early. She was clearly shocked by me showing up, and this is when her face changes. She glares at me, and suddenly we aren't good tenants anymore, and she calls us white trash for not taking our garbage bins out in time for trash day. She screams that she's going to get us evicted if we don't get on her good side, and at this point we just close the door in her face. We had a really long discussion about whether or not we should complain to our landlord about her, and we assumed that he actually was dating this girl and that she just happened to be crazy. She probably caught him cheating and was trying to sleep with my boyfriend for revenge or something, but realized that wasn't going to happen. Eventually, we decided to text him. He apologized for the situation, but was very vague. He doesn't mention that she is not his fiancée and that he'll remove her, and we assume that this is the end of it. For the last month, she's been blasting music, banging on the walls, taking things out of the shed, and coming into our section of the backyard in the middle of the night. I was absolutely terrified the first week and couldn't sleep at all. I would stay up all night listening to sounds and staring at our back window to see if she was in our yard, and eventually I just kind of got used to it. Our landlord had basically vanished. We hadn't seen him for the entire month until today. And today my boyfriend is walking our dog when he sees our landlord back on his porch, and our landlord finally tells us the full story. He went on a few dates with this woman, and she seemed totally normal. Eventually, they go back to his section of the house, and when he wakes up, she's behaving much differently. He asks her to head out while he's at work, and he comes back and she's still there. And it turns out that this is what she does. She goes home with men and invades their home until they get her lawfully evicted. My landlord went to a different property for a month while he worked on a case to get her evicted. And we found out that she got served an eviction warning the same day that she came to our house, and that's why she was flirting with my boyfriend in an attempt to squat in our home. And that's why she was so angry when she found out that I lived there too. My landlord actually negotiated a way to get her out of the house a few days early. He bought her a one-way flight to another state, so if you live in the Midwest, watch out. She's coming north, and I'm very thankful that it's over here. I was born in Moscow, Russia in the early 90s, but my brother was born in 1980, and this is his story. I was about 7 to 8 years old, and me, along with my friends, were the absolute biggest idiots in terms of doing dangerous stuff. We would make smoke bombs, fireworks, etc. out of anything that we found, and did tons of stupid other stuff. Russia in the late 80s resembled the post-apocalyptic wasteland that you see in movies in a lot of places, mainly because there was really no law and order, so no one cared. You were able to buy crazy things off the streets. My father was once offered an old rocket launcher. And with this, parents often just let their kids sort of screw around in these places, so we would do other stupid stuff in these abandoned buildings. Well, one day, we were messing around when one of my friends noticed someone lurking nearby. We didn't really care. We were used to seeing weird stuff, but after a bit we noticed the person was not really moving, just sort of stood there. When he noticed we had seen him, the man slowly walked into view. A large, bald man, black coat, a nice one, likely an import, which was expensive at the time, and American sneakers, also very expensive. He didn't really greet us or anything, but must have seen me looking at his shoes because he just said, "Like my shoes? I've more if you want them. Come on." Now, a few things really unnerved any of us, but this dude definitely did. If you know anything about Russia in that era, this dude looked like someone you did not want to mess with. The kicker, though, once he turned around, my friend noticed that he had a gun in his pants. and the second he saw that, he just yelled gun and booked it, and we all just sort of scattered. I just heard the guy loudly curse and didn't see him again. And now if the story ended here, it would have been just a creepy encounter, but sometime later, we were no longer allowed to play in that area. I found out much later that they had found another child beaten to death with a rock in that building shortly after our experience. And to be honest, as a kid, I never really thought much about this until my parents told me about the death, at which point the dots connected and I realized what we potentially ran away from. A few years ago, I, a 35-year-old male, had a terrifying experience that still haunts me today. I was living in a busy city at the time, and I just finished a late shift at work. It was around 10 p.m., and I was walking home through the quieter side streets of my neighborhood. I'm someone who's always been somewhat cautious, so I was alert, keeping an eye out for any unusual activity. As I walked down the street, I noticed a guy about 20 feet behind me. At first, I didn't think much of it. He seemed just like another person walking the same route. But something about his movements caught my attention. He wasn't walking in a normal manner. He was clearly trying to keep his distance, but his pace matched mine no matter how fast or slow I went. And after a few blocks, I decided to take a detour. I turned onto a side street that was a little less populated, hoping that he wouldn't follow. I checked over my shoulder, and sure enough, he was still there. And it's hard to describe, but I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. My instincts told me something wasn't right. I crossed the street, hoping that would throw him off, but he crossed too without hesitation. And I thought, okay, this is weird now, and I had to make a decision. I wasn't that far from home, but something about this guy's persistence made me uncomfortable. I decided to stop at a nearby 24/7 convenience store to try and lose him. The store was empty, save for the cashier, who barely looked up from their phone. I quickly grabbed a drink and stood by the door, hoping to see if this guy would pass by. He didn't. He stopped right outside the store, and at this point, I could see his face clearly through the glass, and he was staring directly at me. I panicked and ran back into the aisles, trying to calm down, and I could hear his footsteps growing louder as he approached the door. I couldn't stay any longer. I tried to pay, but I was so rattled that I couldn't focus on anything. The cashier just stared at me, probably wondering why I looked so frantic. I threw the drink on the counter, paid quickly, and bolted out the door. I ran down another street, not wanting to look back, but knowing that I had to. I didn't see him for a while, but my heart slowly started to calm down. But as I turned the corner to my street, I saw him again, standing at the far end of the block. It was like he had been waiting there the whole time. I wasn't sure what to do next. I considered calling the police, but he hadn't really done anything illegal, just sort of followed me for a while, and I didn't want to overreact. But I also couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't a coincidence. He was still standing there, watching me, and now he was closer. I took a deep breath, checked both ways, and made a beeline for my apartment building, not daring to look back until I was inside. When I got to the apartment, I locked the door and stayed there, staring out the window for what felt like hours. I didn't see him again after that night, but the whole experience left me unsettled for weeks. I never felt comfortable walking home alone late at night after that, even though I've lived in the city my entire life. I still wonder if I was just being paranoid, but there was something off about the way he followed me. It felt intentional, and it left me with a gut feeling I couldn't shake. This is my story about being stalked. Dealing with this has been difficult, and throughout the ordeal I felt out of control, so I'm sharing this to gain control over my story. Several years ago, I moved abroad to begin a 2-year study course. When I arrived at my apartment, I met 3 of my roommates. Sam was funny and sarcastic, while Bella and Poppy were both nice sorority-type girls. We decided to go out for dinner and offered to invite our 4th roommate into room 1C next to mine. Sam warned me not to invite her, saying that she was odd, and I was worried because I didn't want to live with a bunch of catty girls, and how they were fighting in less than a day was weird, and I just smiled and told Sam that she just made a bad first impression and I would invite her to get to know her better. Sam grumbled as I left the kitchen, approaching the door next to mine. I knocked and the door opened. A short, petite girl with long brown hair and a childlike face stuck her head out. I introduced myself and invited her to dinner. The girl's face lifted at my invitation as she nodded in agreement. Our excitement about the new school year kept us lively as we arrived at the restaurant. I decided to befriend the girl in room 1C since we were sharing a bathroom. I learned that her name was Nellie, and we were the same age, from the same state, and in the same program. I ordered a Jack and Coke as Nellie leaned into me and asked if I actually drank alcohol. I nodded, thinking her question was a bit odd, and we were both in our 20s. Of course I drink. Nellie focused her attention on me while we ate, and as I got to know Nellie, I felt kind of bad for her. She was born in Sri Lanka, but immigrated as a kid, and since she had an accent and lisp, I assumed that she was probably bullied. Nellie was different from me. She was shy and claimed not to have any hobbies or friends, but I figured that since we were in the same program, I could befriend her, and I asked if she wanted to sit with me in class, and she happily agreed. I felt content knowing that I was befriending her, like I was sort of doing a good deed. Now, my first 2 weeks abroad went smoothly. I got used to my surroundings, made friends, and got along with my roommates. Sam, Bella, Poppy, and I would often cook and eat dinner together while chatting about our days. Nellie and I got along, but she was socially awkward. I made it my goal to befriend her, which was easy because we sat together in lecture every day. We even opened our bedroom doors in unison. I would open my door, then Nellie would open hers and ask me where I was going. One day, I left my room to go grocery shopping when Nellie's door opened and she asked me to join. I agreed, and she hurriedly put on her sandals and neon pink coat. I walked through the aisle, Nellie silently following close behind me. Eventually, I found everything I needed, but Nellie said that she wasn't buying anything. And after I paid for everything, we began to exit the store, and the alarms went off. I stopped to show the security guard my receipt, and he looked in my bags, confirming that I had not stolen anything. I didn't think much of this incident, but when I stood at the front of the store with Nellie for the 4th time as my bags were searched by security, a thought crept into my mind. The alarms never rang when I was alone or with friends. They only rang when I was with Nellie. I shook my head, and Nellie couldn't be stealing. I was with her the whole time. She was a perfectly nice, normal girl, and I was rude for even thinking anything contrary. The harmony in the apartment only lasted 2 weeks. One morning, I shuffled into the bathroom and saw that the toilet was completely filled with 2 or 3 rolls of dry, unraveled toilet paper spilled onto the floor. However, what concerned me the most was the huge wad of hair that sat directly on top of the toilet paper. I knew then that it was Nellie who had done this. She was the only person with a bathroom key, and her hair color was a match. I tried to think of any reason that Nellie would do this. Maybe she clogged the toilet, then stuffed it with the toilet paper to hide her business, but that didn't explain the wad of hair. I couldn't harp on the issue, though, so I made a maintenance request to have someone unclog the toilet, and when I came home from class, the toilet was unclogged. I studied for 2 hours before going back to the bathroom. I was annoyed when I found the toilet clogged again, toilet paper, hair, and all, and this obviously wasn't a mistake anymore, and now we were out of toilet paper. I knew I had to say something, but I didn't want to directly confront Nellie about this sort of awkward topic, so I sent a very passive, non-aggressive message. "Hey, if something goes wrong with the toilet, can you make a maintenance request right away, please?" I sent the message, careful not to make it accusatory. I didn't want there to be tension with Nellie, especially since she still sat with me in class. Nellie never acknowledged the situation. She still opened her door with mine, hung out with me, and sat with me in class. And for the next 2 months, I just dealt with the constant toilet paper and torn-out hair. I tried sending more texts, but it didn't help. Nellie would clog the toilet, I'd make a maintenance request, a staff member would clean Nellie's mess, and then she would just do it again. Eventually, after 12 clogged toilets, I was so annoyed that I decided to confront Nellie. "Nellie, I know you're clogging the toilet and you need to stop. If you do it again, I'm going to report you." And I pressed send as I walked to class. I decided that I wouldn't sit with Nellie anymore. I had different friends to sit with who didn't clog my toilet, and as I sat down with Reagan and Charlotte, I felt bad seeing Nellie sit across the lecture hall, and I promised myself that I'd still be friends with her and that everything would be fine. I was happy that the holiday break was soon and that Nellie never addressed me not sitting with her. My message had worked. Nellie stopped clogging the toilet and we were still friends, but I came home one day in early December and my nose scrunched in disgust. There was a sickly, sweet, rotten yogurt-like smell coming from Nellie's room. I didn't want to confront Nellie so soon after messaging her about the toilet, so for 2 weeks I avoided the problem. I didn't address the issue until 2 weeks later when all of our food started to rot almost immediately after buying it. Bella, Sam, and Poppy were complaining about how maintenance hadn't found the source of what was causing our food to rot when I brought up the horrible smell and an accompanying fly infestation. The girls went to go smell the hallway outside of Nellie's room and returned a minute later, coughing and gagging. We posited about what may be causing the smell when Sam brought up seeing Nellie at 2 a.m. skipping through the woods. Sam was heading back from the club and Nellie was skipping around like a possessed doll, according to Sam. And as we spoke, Nellie entered the kitchen and everyone fell quiet. Sam bluntly asked Nellie what the smell in her room was, and Nellie just silently shrugged her shoulders. Annoyed by this, Sam stood up and grabbed Nellie's arm, guiding her into the hallway as the rest of us followed, covering our noses with our sleeves. Nellie claimed not to smell anything, but her eyes were darting rapidly between the three of us. Sam made a sarcastic comment toward Nellie as we returned to the kitchen without Nellie. Sam was a bit harsh, and part of me felt bad for Nellie, and at least Christmas would be relaxing. I spent 2 weeks at a friend's house with her family for Christmas, and they were all welcoming, so I didn't miss home too much. My friend knew about Nellie, so she bought me scented candles for Christmas. When I returned to the apartment, I felt rested and equipped to face the new year. My January exams were online and pretty easy, so I was surprised when Nellie texted me asking if I would cheat with her on the final exam. I politely declined, and she asked if I would go to lunch the next day. I had no plan, so I accepted her invitation. I spent a lot of time with her, but she never actually spoke much, so despite everything, I wanted to get to know her better. Once we were at the restaurant, I racked my brain for things I could talk with Nellie about. Attempting to break the awkward silence, I asked her what her favorite show was. Nellie told me that she loves to watch Sophia the First, and I was confused. Sophia the First is a Disney toddler show that came out when we were teens. Why was she watching a show for toddlers in her 20s? I didn't know how to expand on what she said, so I changed the topic and asked what her favorite hobby was. Nellie giggled and said, "I do this a lot, actually. I listen to you through the walls. They're so thin. I barely put my ear against it, and I hear you talk to your parents every day." I tried not to look horrified as I sat there confused and a little scared. Nellie started laughing. "You're like a mother, but I'm an aunt and we're sisters together." I smiled awkwardly and nodded, and I had no clue how to respond to that. In a desperate attempt to change topics, I asked her about her childhood in Sri Lanka. Nellie slammed her fists on the table, sending my rice flying off the plate. Nellie yelled that she was not from Sri Lanka, and I apologized, even though she definitely told me that she was from Sri Lanka. Nellie began to laugh again. "I have plans for us tonight. We'll go to the graveyard and walk around. You'll be scared, but I'll have fun with you." Nellie's eyes were opened incredibly wide, and her mouth seemed to open more than usual. She was scaring me, and I didn't want to be rude, so I said that I'd invite our other roommates too. At that, Nellie let go of her fork and quickly moved her hand onto mine, and she insisted that we had to go alone. I pulled my hand back, attempting to hide my grimace, and stuttered out a very disingenuous maybe. Nellie leaned back slowly, rolling her head from one side to the other, and mumbled about how fun it will be. The rest of our lunch was silent. When we got back to the apartment, I said goodbye to her and went into my room. I didn't call my parents that night. I went to bed early, hoping to quell my anxiety and get some much-needed rest. The next day, I did laundry, went shopping, and by 2 p.m., I was meal prepping for the week. I jumped when Nellie asked me to go to the movies with her. I hadn't heard her come into the kitchen, but there she stood, her head down and eyes turned up staring at me. I declined her request, but she repeated her question. I politely declined once again, trying to offset her bizarre vibe, and Nellie didn't respond and retreated back to her room and then left for the movies. An hour later, I went to the bathroom, and when I opened the door, I gagged immediately. The smell was bad, but the sight was worse. The walls, floors, door, sink, and toilet were covered in smeared poop and blood. I could see distinct handprints. I closed the door, tried not to puke, and I was shocked that Nellie had done this, but my shock turned into anger as I messaged Nellie. "What you did is weird and disgusting. You need to clean it. I'm going to report you." I pressed send. I no longer cared about being friends with Nellie. And I felt gross, so I went to our shower room next to the bathroom, but Nellie ruined that too. There was toilet paper shoved in the shower drain and wads of toilet paper crusted onto the walls. And I was livid at this point, but I had to wait until Monday to report her, so I laid down to take a nap. 2 hours later, I was awoken by Nellie slamming the front door. I heard her footsteps until her feet were visible through the crack under my door. I expected her to knock, but she didn't. Instead, Nellie began to continuously chirp like a bird. She briefly paused, then began twisting my doorknob in unison with her chirps. I stood there, unnerved as Nellie did this for 5 minutes. Then Nellie began to rapidly knock on my door and call my phone. 7 times she called, hung up, and then called again while rapidly still knocking. Nellie then began ramming her body into my door, over and over. The shock of it made me stumble back onto my bed. Then, as suddenly as it started, Nellie stopped, her feet still visible under my door. My phone buzzed and I slowly unlocked it, staring down in horror at Nellie's text. The cockroach screamed. "Why do this to me?" "Because you couldn't be positive in a negative situation," the doctor said. The doctor pulls off the cockroach's legs and it cries. The doctor has no choice. The cockroach must be killed and its family taken away. You are the funny cockroach. I was terrified as Nellie began to knock and chirp. I was scared to call the cops because I was on a visa, and if they didn't believe me, I could be deported for making a false report. I texted Poppy and Bella, who had heard everything. Nellie stood there for an hour straight, occasionally pushing her fingers through the cracks under my door. When Bella's boyfriend arrived, his presence scared Nellie away. We met up and talked about what had happened before going to bed, and that night I barely slept as I was too scared. I awoke the next day anxious about the previous night's events. I tried to convince myself that it wasn't that bad. However, as I peeked into the bathroom, its condition suggested otherwise. Charlotte and Reagan were skipping class, so I sat alone. I saw Nellie under the room, bypass her regular seat, weave through the aisles and inspect each rose she passed. I sank in my chair as she got closer, horrified by the realization that she was searching for me. And with the last night's memories fresh in my mind, I froze in fear when Nellie found me and robotically bent down to meet my eye line as she sat next to me with her mouth twisted in a very sinister smile. I did nothing as she sat next to me, too scared to move and worried that any tiny shift may cause her to attack. When the professor dismissed us, I shot up, frantically packing my things. Nellie asked where I was going, and I lied to her, saying I was going to the cafe. I didn't want her to know where I was. So I went home for lunch, and as I stood in the kitchen, the door opened. "You weren't at the cafe." Nellie's eyes darted up to me, and she was looking at a knife on the table. I apologized and told Nellie my plans had changed. My heart raced as I asked her if she liked the lecture, and Nellie didn't respond. She just stared at me, head tilted and mouth agape, and I asked her again, but she still didn't answer. I faced her, afraid that she'd use that knife on me, and she glared so intently that her veins were protruding, and she stood there for 10 minutes before leaving. Later on, I walked to the library and froze as I saw Nellie's pink jacket behind me. I turned to see Nellie staring at me with vacant eyes, and she followed me into the library up to the 3rd floor and then sat directly behind me. With her threat still fresh in my mind, I moved to a different spot, but Nellie followed me. I tried again, but she still followed. I was scared to be isolated in a library with her, so I decided to leave. I quickly weaved through the bookshelves, desperately trying to reach the lobby, but Nellie matched my pace, and I was nearing a heart attack when I ran into my guardian angel, Sam. "Nellie's following me," I blurted out. Sam looked at Nellie, who had stopped 5 feet behind me. Sam nonchalantly told Nellie to F off, and I was surprised when Nellie did just that. After Sam and I spoke for a bit, my phone buzzed, and it was Nellie inviting me to the graveyard that night. She told me that I'd be smart to move out, and she was right. I needed to report Nellie and move out. It wasn't safe for me to live in that apartment anymore. I just needed to get away. I went to Reagan's apartment, as she was the closest person I had to family while I was abroad, and she gave me refuge while listening to me retell the last 48 miserable hours of my life. She assured me that I could stay with her, and as I held back tears, my phone buzzed. Sam texted that she needed help and to go to the apartment ASAP. I was hesitant to go back in there, but I couldn't just abandon Sam, so I grabbed my stuff and told Reagan that I'd be back soon. I walked to my apartment and stared up at it, feeling a lot like the priest in that Exorcist movie. When I got to my door, I was immediately greeted by 3 roommates' distraught faces. I followed them into the apartment, and my eyes grew wide as Sam pushed open the kitchen door to reveal a very demonic sight. Huge amounts of congealed red and orange liquid pooled across the floor leading beneath our table, where a small bird lay dead with its wings outstretched and its head missing. I felt sick. The windows don't open, so it didn't get in here by itself. Nellie had either found this bird and brought it into the kitchen, or she killed and decapitated a living bird and then put it in the kitchen. I didn't like either of those options. I assured my roommates that I would report Nellie that night, and that's exactly what I did. I spoke to the school safety board and things moved fast. I discovered that Nellie had lied to us about her name and age. Officials in hazmat suits came to clean the kitchen and Nellie's room. The board had me send them photos of myself daily in case Nellie killed me and they had to identify me, and I quickly moved out, and since Nellie avoided the other girls, they decided to stay. I declined to submit Nellie for expulsion because I felt bad for her and thought that moving would stop her obsession with me, but I was incredibly misguided. I was happy that my new roommates were normal, and no Nellie incidents had happened for 2 weeks. I did have a large uptick in random daily Facebook and Instagram follower requests from blank profile users, and I knew who was behind this, but I was avoiding any Nellie-related thoughts. I was having night terrors, and the more I thought about her, the worse they got. I blocked another user as I sat down with Reagan and Charlotte in an almost empty lecture hall. Charlotte nudged me as Nellie entered the room, bypassing her usual seat. I felt myself freeze up as she entered our row and began walking toward me, staring at me with her dead eyes. "Don't sit next to me," I said, shocked by my bravery. Nellie responded by sitting 10 seats down from me, not breaking eye contact, and I considered that a win. After class, I went home and then walked to the store. I forgot to grab a card, so I quickly turned around to fetch one and ran into someone standing directly behind me. It was Nellie. Did she follow me from my apartment? Does she know where I live now? My heart stopped as I backed into another aisle and Nellie followed. I walked to another aisle, but Nellie followed me, matching my pace until I went to another aisle and she began to run. I ran away terrified, and Nellie only stopped when I got to the security desk. Security offered to call the police, but I declined and gave them my email to send me the footage of Nellie chasing me. I had to report Nellie, but since I still had class that day, I decided to report her the next day. 2 hours later, as I waited for Reagan to walk with me to class, I caught Nellie staring at me across the street. But she didn't approach me and walked with a crowd toward campus. Minutes later, Reagan found me and we were headed to class together. I walked beside Reagan, past the buildings and alleyways until a rock caught in my shoe and I bent down to fix it. Reagan switched to the right side of me to look at a billboard, and when I removed the rock, we began walking again. I turned my head to speak when Nellie jumped out of an alleyway and on to Reagan. Her hands were outstretched and clasped around Reagan's neck, and words cannot explain how terrified I was. Nellie let go immediately, and Reagan grabbed my arm, walking forward. Nellie began walking shoulder to shoulder with me, her head turned sideways at an unnatural angle. The look in her eyes was not human. Reagan told me to run, and we bolted across the street. Nellie paused, but walked away, traffic stopping her from crossing. We stopped, and Reagan leaned against the fence as I bent over and covered my mouth, trying not to vomit. And after a while, we continued our walk to class in silence, and we made it to the lobby and headed for the staircase, but Nellie stood at the bottom of it. "I won't let her walk behind me," I said, voice shaking. Reagan nodded, and we followed a large crowd after Nellie walked upstairs, only to find her holding the door open for everyone. Nellie stared at me through the crowd until everyone but Reagan and I had passed through. "It's okay. You can go first," Reagan said while smiling at Nellie. I was shocked at how composed she was, and even more shocked that Nellie listened. When we sat down in class, Nellie tried to sit behind me, but someone was saving the seat for his friend, so Nellie left. I didn't pay any attention that lecture. I sat there shocked and terrified while Reagan hunched over low in her seat, rubbing her neck. I felt horrible for bringing Reagan into this Nellie crap, and I knew then that Nellie needed to be expelled no matter what. The next day I reported Nellie to the Student Safety Board, and they raised the issue to the Disciplinary Board. I submitted a lengthy report detailing everything Nellie had done. I included Reagan, Bella, Poppy, and Sam as witnesses and gave photographic evidence of the threats, the calls, the smeared poop and blood, clogged showers and toilets, and the stalking. The next week I met with the Disciplinary Board to go over their conclusions. They informed me that they had reviewed my report, met with Nellie to give her a copy of my report, discussed my accusations, and had come to a conclusion. They acknowledged that everything I reported was factual, but they didn't think that Nellie had any malicious intent, so they would grant a no-contact order, but Nellie wouldn't be expelled. I was completely perplexed by their conclusion and asked them what Nellie had said about all of this, but they refused to tell me anything, and I was at a loss for words. I couldn't believe Nellie was given my full report, knew everything that I said, and knew the witnesses' names, and the school put us all in danger, essentially. Yet they wouldn't allow me to know if Nellie had even denied her actions, and I was devastated. I felt my mind go numb, and I knew at that moment that they didn't care. They were going to prioritize a predator. And so with no other options, I agreed to the no-contact order. The worker tried to get me to sign a non-disclosure agreement so that I wouldn't speak about what Nellie did to me or how the school dealt with my case, but I refused to sign it. The next day, I received an email notification and confirmation that Nellie had agreed to the no-contact order, but I knew that meant nothing. Nellie wouldn't get help and would never stop stalking me. And my sophomore year was plagued by a relentless pattern of Nellie stalking me from place to place, sitting next to me in class, standing next to me in hallways, and staring at me daily. Her actions were so unnerving and obvious that multiple strangers warned me about her. I reported these incidents every time they occurred, and the school always responded by stating that they would remind Nellie of the no-contact order, and they never took any further steps to help me. In sophomore year, Nellie found other roommates, and in them, new victims. She was evicted from an off-campus apartment, and her new roommates, who once sat with her, began to sit far away from Nellie, and they looked terrified. They looked just like me. Having incidents happen weekly, and having to see Nellie daily made it impossible for me to move on. I was always in flight to freeze mode, terrified by what Nellie had done and still might do to me. I became a sunken-in, miserable, and defeated version of myself. I wanted revenge, a natural result of the boiling rage I felt, now at a constant simmer after Nellie was coddled by a university that failed to shell out even a minor consequence for the terror that she imposed on me. I wanted Nellie to suffer in the exact way that she made me suffer. I know if I had just grown a pair at any point in those early months, I likely could have saved myself and others from suffering. Nellie was likely stalking me from the moment I met her. I just hadn't realized it, and it weighs heavily on me to know that I played a large part in my own suffering. No matter what I write, I can't begin to recreate the evil that radiated off of Nellie. I have daily night terrors. I don't go into new situations, I don't speak to new people, and I don't make new friends. I'm not nice to strangers because I don't want to invite something like this into my life again. Revenge came on graduation day when Nellie's name didn't appear in the book of graduates. She had failed second year, but despite everything, I couldn't help but think that I was a bad person for being content with Nellie failing. Maybe I was just happy that I could finally move on. I was a child, between 5 years old to 10, and I remember bits and pieces, but some of it is what I recall my mother telling me years ago. My mom had a friend we grew up with, Donna. Donna and her daughter came over to hang out with my sister and I numerous times, having sleepovers and the like. One time, Donna was fighting with her boyfriend and I guess had fled to our house during the breakup, or maybe she was already over when her ex freaked out. Either way, I remember being hurried into my sister's room by Donna, along with my sisters and Donna's daughter. Donna flipped my sister's full-size bed on its side and had us lay down against the wall with the mattress and box frame leaning against the wall above us, and then moved the dresser to the door. I closed my eyes and covered my ears because I was still afraid of the dark and my sister kept crying, and this is the last I remember of the night. My mother told me that apparently Donna barricaded us in my sister's room because of her ex, Fred, and him having showed up unexpectedly looking for her. My mother went to defuse the situation and explained that Donna wasn't here, we hadn't heard from her, and go somewhere else. Fred went to his car and came out with some sort of shotgun, while my mom fled back inside, locking the door. Fred let one shot go as she went in the door, peppering my mom's back with pellets in the front of our house. I guess very shortly after, the police arrived and subdued Fred without a fight. I'm not sure how long it took or what happened between her being shot and the police showing up, but I know we lived right down the block from the police station and my mom had called when she saw Fred get there before she ever confronted him. My mom's boyfriend, who worked nights, rushed home and was checking on my sister and I as my father, my parents were split co-parenting, shows up. Apparently my mom didn't get to properly explain what happened in the phone call with my dad, so all he got from it was boyfriend shooting near kids, and came over. My dad punched my mom's boyfriend in the face, putting him out cold before being told that he wasn't the shooter. My dad and her boyfriend had never had issues prior and didn't after when my dad found out her boyfriend left work and rushed over to check on us first. But yeah, my mom told me the truth about that night about a year before she passed away. She died with pellets still in her neck and back from that night that caused chronic pain, but for reasons beyond my understanding were not treatable. So this started on one of those meet new friends apps. I'm not just a huge loser, I swear. I moved to my current city during the pandemic and have a work-from-home position, so it just hasn't been the prime circumstances for a social life. I matched with this random girl, and we'll call her Annie. I can't remember if I saw her first or vice versa, and honestly, I was paying more attention to the profiles than the pictures, and she seemed okay. Spirituality came up somehow. I can't remember how this happened either, and to be fair, it could have been either of us. I've recently been more seriously following Norse paganism, but it wasn't something I was seeking to explore with other people. It was mostly a private thing, not to mention my own beliefs are more metaphorical. But that doesn't mean I'm closed to the experience entirely. So when she mentioned having an LGBTQ neurodivergent pagan femme coven, I was like, okay, wow, that's either very specific or very broad. But hey, why not? Maybe it'll be fun. And so we agreed to meet first before I went to the event. One weird thing that stuck out in our text conversation was that her partner was in some bizarre Scientology rehab. And at first I assumed this was a place where one recovers from Scientology. But I did ask her if her partner was a Scientologist, and I didn't get an answer. We only met for an hour to have coffee. I think more red flags would have popped up if we'd had more time, because the little things that went off on my radar were things that weren't that weird. Like there were explanations, or I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt, and my dumb self didn't ask again about the Scientology thing. I kept meaning to Google Scientology rehab, but kinda kept forgetting to do so. I've since Googled it and can't find anything about a rehabilitation for ex-Scientologists, so I wish I'd done that sooner. There were, however, other things that stuck out to me. They're relatively benign out of context, but putting everything together in retrospect made me feel dumb. She wouldn't answer my direct questions about herself, and not for lack of asking. I'm the kind of person who is conscious of when the attention is all on me, so it made me uncomfortable, and I didn't learn anything about her, really. Most of what she said had to do with her spiritual, quote-unquote, awakening. Her spiritual awakening itself sounded weird, too. She said that she had a realization that she was like a lighthouse that was drawing people toward their personal enlightenment. And okay, I did think this was weird, but she's from California. I don't know. And maybe that's normal, but I just chalked it up to her personal beliefs being whatever they were. Reincarnation came up, and reincarnation is a big part of paganism, although Asatru additionally focuses on your ancestors. She told me that she didn't think that she had any past lives and is a new soul, which doesn't make a lot of sense, but okay. Whatever, not my circus, not my monkeys. And the vaguely supernatural element she placed on herself was strange, but I know a lot of people want to feel special, and that didn't mean that I had to believe it. At one point, I told her about this random woman I met at the pagan festival who tried to con me. She wanted to charge me so I could be under her wing or whatever. I don't need someone to protect or guide me, so I declined. And as I was telling the story, I could tell Annie was conflicted. Like she wanted to agree but didn't, and finally she said something blasé, like how it was only inappropriate because the student chose the teacher. And so I clarified that I did not want a teacher, and her responses were very mirroring. And I'm not a moron. I was getting a weird sense that she wasn't being honest with me and that she was telling me things that I wanted to hear, and told myself that she was probably just nervous. I have a strong personality. I'm very independent, so I can understand if someone wouldn't want to go up against the things I said at our very first meeting. I know I'm just dumb at this point, but I didn't want to be paranoid. And I don't trust people easily, and I know that, so I was just trying to loosen up and be more chill. Well, that was a big mistake. And so I go to this thing. And immediately it's weird. Immediately. The second I step foot in that house, I'm uncomfortable. It's filled with people and completely silent, and everyone is looking directly at me. I'm laughing, kind of saying hi, and no one is really responding. And here I am, awkwardly dropping my keys and phone while everyone is just sort of watching me. Eventually, I take a seat on this short couch because there's no room in the large circle. It's a very small living room, and there are like 20 people circled up. There's a cushion on the couch, so I sit on that. The leader starts talking, and as she's going on, I'm looking around at the people there, and I was curious. Out of the corner of my eye, I see the leader trying to look at me. The girl sitting in front of me is partially blocking our view of each other, so the leader is sort of leaning over to try and meet my gaze. Finally, I felt awkward enough to sort of shift over, so I was leaning against the arm of the couch. Staying perched on a cushion was uncomfortable by that point, so I shifted off and spread out a bit to be more comfortable. And the leader ended the speech with, "So spread out, I guess," which was clearly directed at me. It was said with some humor, though, so I wasn't really sure what to make of it. Everyone introduces themselves and is their own unique brand of neurodivergent. I'm ADHD, but I guess I don't subscribe to labels beyond the requirement to stay medicated, and I've been medicated since 2015, so this isn't a new diagnosis for me. This was the only question we got asked about ourselves beyond our name. The leader guides us through this meditation, and people are making these weird breathing sounds and hums. And I get it. It's spiritual, right? Unfortunately, my ADHD bud couldn't focus to save my life, and it's impossible for me to follow the guided meditation. I just don't understand. How can anyone with actual attention issues listen past trills and deep nose breathing? And so I'm sitting there with my eyes closed and barely paying attention because I just can't. But I do hear the leader say that we should think about anything we'd want to ask her and need from her, and that got my attention. What did I need to ask her, other than where the snacks were, because I paid $8 and I don't see a single snack? Once the meditation ended, Annie and the leader walked around to give us material for an activity. Annie gave me 2 long pieces of twine and the leader gave me 2 sticks. As the leader was handing me the sticks, I asked her where the snacks were, and she says something like, "In the kitchen, on the table, where snacks tend to be." I'm a dry, sarcastic person, so I thought it was her brand of humor, and I laughed and played along, sort of, "Oh, right, I think I'll find them." And literally she was deadpan, unsmiling, and just says, and then walked away. So, stupid me thought that she might just be like that, and then I saw her laughing with the other girls and realized something was kind of off. As the activity commenced, she went back over to Amy and started stroking her back and kissing her hair and giving me this creepy smile. Okay, that was weird, and I was so uncomfortable that I just wanted to get up and go right there, but I couldn't. Why? Because of this strange activity that we were doing. And the activity was the last straw. They wanted us to think of something that we wanted to discard that brought us pain, and then they wanted us to feel how bad that thing made us feel as we slowly twisted the piece of twine around the stick. And that stuff I would only ever do with my therapist. Obviously, people were emotionally melting down before long. I wasn't comfortable doing the activity for obvious reasons, so I sat there awkwardly with the sticks and the string in my lap, and I was the only one not doing it, and it was obvious. And because I wasn't doing it, I had the opportunity to watch Annie and the leader, and it was chilling to say the least. Annie was doing some weird pyramid thing above her head with her arms. There were a lot of references to her as being a lighthouse and some sort of guiding figure throughout the meeting. She was the only one who wasn't doing the ritual other than the other leader, and they were both running it. And suddenly it occurred to me, as it probably did to you already, that Annie had been using this app just to bring people into their group. She was the only person who seemed to know everyone, yet no one there knew each other. Even the name of the group now made sense. They weren't being specific. They were casting a wide net, and I had this big realization in a handful of seconds, and it made my stomach turn. So yeah, I was done, but I couldn't get up because people were sharing their experiences and stuff and pouring their hearts out, and this was the most effed up part about it, in my opinion. There's no reason to do a releasing ceremony that forces people to feel their trauma, especially at the very first meeting. It's also inherently manipulative because it requires people to let their guard down, and then they can save the day by showing people how to release that very same pain they just inflicted. But that isn't the fault of the people there, so I didn't want to disrespect them. People were sobbing on top of my shoes I left by the door. I had to wait for the best time to ask someone to pass them to me, and finally I got up and told everyone that I had to go to the car and then just took off. I texted Annie and told her that I wouldn't be back and that I hoped that she found her people. Just make sure you're not her people. Be really careful of any spiritual ceremony or practice that demands vulnerability from you, especially directed by people who don't know you beyond a name. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations.